How are you, tired listener? Tonight, you're going to fall asleep learning 50 legitimate reasons to never, ever wish for a time machine. Because frankly, the past stinks. Literally. We are about to descend together into the glorious Middle Ages, an era when the plague checked in without warning, when any cold wind could be mistaken for divine punishment, and when living to 35 officially put you in the ancient ancestor category. Take a deep breath. Enjoy the silence of your room, the softness of your mattress, and the simple miracle of a flushing toilet. And before sleep arrives, or the boredom simply wins, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because if you don't, YouTube thinks this content is useless. And honestly, it's not entirely wrong, but at least it takes effort to make. So help us out. And also, comment what time it is where you are. I always like to know who's trying to fall asleep while listening to tales of medieval diseases and digestive tragedies. Now turn off the lights. Let's go together on this damp, foul-smelling and, to say the least, bewildering journey. Today, you'll get to know 50 absurd things that were perfectly normal in the Middle Ages. Some will disgust you, others will make you cringe, and many will leave you profoundly relieved to be lying in the 21st century with toilet paper at your disposal. You start the day by stepping on something soft. It might be mud. It might be chicken droppings. It might be both, because they basically coexist on the floor of your house. A cubicle of wood and straw where you live with your family, 3 chickens, a skinny pig, and a cousin nobody remembers where he came from. The concept of personal space hasn't been invented yet. Neither has soap. The heavy, single wool blanket hasn't been washed since the last solstice. The smell is a mix of sweat, smoke, and time. And by time, I mean 3 seasons without a bath. You wake up because a bell rang. Not to wish you a good morning, but to remind you it's time to pray. God is watching you, and probably disappointed. You try to stretch, but the cold bites at your joints. The mattress is a pile of old straw that rustles as if it has feelings, and you rustle too. Every bone, every joint, every piece of your body screams for mercy. You are 22 years old and you already look 60. Oral hygiene, well, it doesn't exist. Your firmest tooth is wobbly. The other one fell out yesterday while you were biting into bread that could easily be used as a weapon. Brushing your teeth. Only if it's with a chewed-on twig. Toothpaste is apparently an invention of the devil. But you don't need to worry. The general breath of the population is so offensive that no one judges anyone else. It's a collective pact of bad odor. You leave the house, if you can call that cubicle a house, and head for the wishing bucket. Physiological wishes. In this case, the bathroom is, officially, a bucket. And when the bucket is full, someone has to throw the contents out the window, warning passers-by with a dramatic shout in Old French, "Garde à l'eau! Watch out for the water!" But it's not water. It never was. The streets, by the way, are rivers of waste. The ground is slick. The dampness invades your socks, if you even have socks. And the mixture of smells is almost spiritual. You don't walk through the village, you survive the journey. Every step is a negotiation between mud, feces, food scraps, and a random animal crossing your path. Time for breakfast. You huddle near the fire that died out last night, trying to warm yourself with the steam from whatever is left in the pot. Potage. A generic mixture that's been fermenting for days or weeks, with unidentifiable bits of vegetables, roots, and whatever else falls in. The rule is clear. If it's not moving, you can eat it. Next to the pot, some bread. Bread is a compliment. This thing is a rock made of bran, maybe mixed with sawdust. Wheat is for nobles. You eat rye with fungus. Sometimes the fungus kills you. Sometimes it just makes you see dragons. Nobody knows. Nobody asks. Eating is a gamble. To drink, ale. At 6 in the morning, because the water kills, literally, even from the well, because there's always someone who emptied their bucket just upstream. The children drink ale too, just weaker. It's an alcoholic childhood, but a living one. Your stomach hurts. You ignore it. You always ignore it. Pain is part of existence. Sometimes it's hunger, sometimes it's cramps, sometimes it's the plague circling, but you don't have time to think about it. You have to work. A lot. And by work, understand, digging, carrying, planting, pulling, praying, coughing and continuing. Hunger follows you all day like a shadow. So does the cold, and the fleas, and the lice. They all share your body as if it were a hotel. And it is. Just one with terrible service. At night you return, hopefully still with all your toes. You sit in the same dark corner, with the same people, listening to the same sermon about how suffering is a virtue, hunger is a sign of faith, and that's just life. You pretend to believe it, because questioning is dangerous, and dying for heresy is more common than you think. The day ends, as it began, with a bell. You lie down, thank God you didn't die, and wait for sleep. Maybe it will come, maybe it won't. The mattress itches, your brother's cough echoes, the pig snores, and the straw stabs your back with a malice only the 14th century knows. And that was just the surface. There are still many medieval oddities to parade through here, because if your biggest worry today is not forgetting the Wi-Fi password, you should know that things were much, much worse. You finished what they called breakfast, but what felt more like divine punishment. Still chewing on a piece of bread that may or may not have been made with sawdust, you get up with the energy of someone who knows they'll spend the entire day working just to stay alive and smelling bad. Your body itches, but it itches with purpose. It's dozens of tiny creatures sharing the surface of your skin as if it were a medieval Airbnb. Fleas, lice, bed bugs, maybe a tick with an identity crisis. And you can't complain. After all, even the nobles scratch. Nobody escapes. The aristocracy stinks with more class, but they stink all the same. You try to fix your clothes, you only have one set. And it's not organic cotton or Belgian linen. It's a tunic of thick, rough wool that has seen more winters than you have. It's not clothing, it's a second skin, foul-smelling and damp. Because yes, it always seems damp, even on dry days. An eternal dampness, a cursed inheritance from every poorly ventilated fire and your own sweat, which, by the way, has nowhere to go. Deodorant? Don't even dream of it. And before you think about changing it, well, there's nothing to change into. Laundry is a modern concept. Washing clothes, in your case, means dragging the damn tunic to the river, scrubbing it with ash or fermented urine, yes, pee, and praying you don't lose your fingers in the freezing water, or you just wear it for another 6 months. The second option is preferred. After all, everyone has given up on judging. The bad smell is the new black. Your feet, on the other hand, are in direct contact with reality. That's because shoes, if they exist, are pieces of raw leather sewn together by hand with the delicacy of a butcher. They have no soul, no shape, no function. Most people go barefoot. Mud, sharp stones, thorns, cow dung, it all enters your nervous system via the foot. Ah, but you're not going to stand around lamenting the state of your wardrobe. There's work. And work in the Middle Ages is basically the act of killing yourself slowly in exchange for a suspicious meal and the hope of not catching the bubonic plague on the way. You walk to the field. Field here is a broad concept. It could be dry earth, it could be a swamp, it could be a minefield of hard roots and spiteful rocks. The important thing is that you're going to spend the next 12 hours in it, bent over, dragging tools that were forged in the last century by a drunk blacksmith with childhood trauma. You dig, you plant, you draw water, you cut branches, you harvest, you cough, you sweat. And at no point do you receive a thank you because you're not working for yourself. You're working for the feudal lord, that guy who lives in a castle with glass windows, a luxury, and food with spices, a miracle. He probably doesn't even know your name, but he knows exactly how many sacks of barley you owe him by the end of the month. And spoiler, it's more than you have. Lunch break. Maybe. If there's anything left. The ideal is to carry a piece of hard bread in your tunic pocket, Or if it's a lucky season, a turnip. Yes, a raw turnip. No salt, no oil, no hope. You bite down with difficulty because the tooth on your left side has been hurting since last winter. And it will hurt until it falls out, or until it's pulled by a blacksmith surgeon with a horseshoeing plier, who might also be your brother-in-law. Medicine is just that decentralized. The sun beats on your head like a direct punishment. There's no sunscreen, no decent straw hat. You improvise one with rags and faith. The skin burns, the sweat runs, the lice appreciate the hydration. You keep going because stopping is not an option. Nobody is worried about your well-being, not even you. You just want to end the day with all your limbs still attached to your body and without any unexplained convulsions. But if it rains, does it get better? Of course not. The rain transforms the field into a lake of mud and influenza. You slip, you fall, you get up covered in muck, your foot sinks, your clothes stick, and the cold enters like a malevolent entity through every open seam of your tunic. You wish you were dead, but not out loud, just in case someone hears you. And if you're a woman, congratulations. On top of all that, you have to take care of the children, cook, sew, raise chickens, pray, and smile while you do it all. Childbirth pain is part of the plan. Complaining might raise suspicions of witchcraft. You are multitasking for survival, not by choice. And when everyone is asleep, you still have to tend to the child with a fever, the pig with a cough, and the husband with fleas. Meanwhile, the food waiting for you at home. Well, it's waiting for you with bad intentions too. Dinner is a reincarnation of the morning's pottage, with extra bits, fewer smells, and expanding bacteria. You eat resignation, chew with difficulty, swallow with faith, and you pray it just passes through. You end the day as it began, dirty, tired, bitten, itching, hungry, and still owing 2 sacks of barley. Your body begs for a truce, but the Middle Ages doesn't negotiate. It only offers more of itself. More cold, more mud, more fungus, more tedium, and tomorrow it all starts again. The sky slowly begins to darken, but that doesn't mean the workday is over. In the Middle Ages, the day only ended when the sun completely gave up on illuminating that wet straw you call a world. And even then, if there was a full moon, you might see just enough to keep weeding. After all, why stop? The concept of quality of life hadn't been invented yet, and if it had, it would be immediately dismissed as heresy. You are exhausted, but not that modern exhaustion of someone who sat through 3 useless Zoom meetings. This is an exhaustion that comes from the earth, from the bones, from the soul. You feel crushed and there is nothing to relieve it. There are no massages, no long weekends, no, "I'll just call an Uber." At most, you beg for mercy, but no one answers, because mercy is busy trying to survive too. Your hands are burning. There are no gloves, only calluses and cuts. The wood of the hoe has already formed a spiritual connection with your skin. The handle sticks to your palm, and you can't even feel the difference between your fingers and the tool anymore. Your nails are black, but not for Gothic style. It's just filth, ancestral filth, generations deep. The field is quiet except for the coughing, lots of coughing, a symphony of tired lungs and potential undiagnosed pneumonia. Young people coughing like old men who have already stopped coughing because, well, they've already stopped everything. And there you are, breathing the morning air, which is the same as the afternoon air, just with more dust and maybe a hint of atmospheric fungus. If someone breaks an arm, tough luck. There's no ambulance, no medical referral. There's John, the neighbor who saw an out-of-place bone once and thinks he knows how to push it back in. You writhe in pain. He concentrates. Someone holds your leg, another your head, and the bone will probably never sit right again. But at least now you have a natural hook. You can use it as an excuse not to carry so much straw. If you're an artisan, don't expect glamour. Being a blacksmith means dealing with fire, metal, and a total lack of ventilation. Your face always shining with sweat, even in winter. The leather on your boot has already melted twice, and you're still hammering that horseshoe no one will pay well for. If you're a shoemaker, you've got stinking leather. If you're a baker, the oven roasts you along with the bread. If you're a tanner, well, the smell stays with you for the rest of your life. Literally, you become the olfactory marketing for your trade. And the children aren't in school because school is only for rich kids and sad nuns. The poor child starts working as soon as they can hold a bucket without falling into it. They pull weeds, help milk the cow, get whipped if they do it wrong. A toy is a piece of wood, a doll is a turnip with a face drawn on it, and fun is not dying before dinner. Time passes slowly, and passing slowly here isn't poetic, it's torture. The body asks for rest, but the body isn't in charge. Because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you get weak. And if you get weak, you don't work. It's a medieval depressive loop with no pause, no option to quit the game, no skip tutorial button. And if by chance you get sick, the work continues. The sick person isn't excused. The sick person is just one more person breathing with difficulty and walking slower, but still walking. A fever is an improvised heater, a stomachache, and dietary penance. Weakness is just part of the process of living. You look around and see everyone the same, tired, hunched over, scraped, with a half-lost look that says, "I exist, but I don't recommend it." Nobody dreams. Dreaming takes effort, and hope here is a luxury for priests. You just want to get through the day in one piece, a simple, direct goal, and yet so hard to achieve. What's the reward? A bowl of thin broth, maybe a corner to lie down in, infested with fleas, with slightly less wind than outside. And the vague feeling that at least today you weren't hanged for stealing a turnip. Sometimes in the midst of this grey routine, a feudal lord appears on horseback, all leather, armed, perfumed with rare herbs, looking at you like someone watching moss grow on a wall. He doesn't speak, he just points. Maybe he laughs, then he leaves. But you know he's the one you're sweating for. Every grain of wheat, every bundle of straw carried, every callus on your hands becomes food on his table, and at most, a sigh at yours. By the way, eating in the castle, another universe. While you chew fermented beetroot soup, they're biting into meat, drinking wine, laughing loudly. They are safe from the cold, from disease, and from the mud. But be careful, one misplaced sneeze and even they die. Nobody escapes the Middle Ages. Only the step on the ladder where you experience the disaster changes. With the sky getting darker, you start to organize the day's remains. You put away the tools, shrink your body to pretend you're whole, and walk back to the hole you call home. Your feet drag, your head is heavy, and your whole body already seems to have given up, but it keeps going, because there are still things to do. There always are. While the modern world complains about Mondays, you're there, living every day as if it were Monday, with the face of someone who has already seen the devil up close and didn't greet him because they were busy planting barley. Night has fallen, but that doesn't mean the misfortunes have gone to sleep. On the contrary, when the sun hides, the microorganisms throw their party. You lie down with an aching body and a tattered soul, and you're immediately reminded that you haven't died yet. Because God, for some dark reason, thought you should stick around for one more day. The human warmth in the hut should be comforting, but it's not. It's just hot, hot and suffocating. You share the straw with 4 humans, 2 skinny dogs, and a chicken that insists on sleeping on your head. And there in the darkness, the true medieval ritual begins, coughing. First a child, then your grandmother, then you. A symphonic concert in C minor and phlegm. You don't have a diagnosis because that would require a doctor, and the idea of medieval medicine is, basically, to apply torture methods with a pious smile. If your head hurts, they say it's an excess of black bile. If you have a fever, it's because the blood needs to get out. Everything, absolutely everything, is cured with bloodletting, not the festive drink, the other kind. The one that involves blades, bowls, and the distinct feeling of being slowly drained like a ritual pig. And when it's not bloodletting, it's leeches. Small, wet demons that healers place on your body like prize-winning stickers. They suck your blood with enthusiasm, and you pretend it makes sense because the alternative is to pray until your body evaporates. But before that, maybe someone will suggest a poultice of feces and vinegar. Exactly. Excrement. Because, in the end, if it's already bad on the inside, why not make it worse on the outside? If you have a toothache, which is almost certain, there are equally medieval options. One is to stick a hot nail in your ear. It doesn't solve it, but it distracts you. Another is to let the tooth fall out naturally, meaning wait for it to rot, create an abscess, and maybe kill you with septicemia. There's still the exciting possibility of going to the local barber, who between shaves pulls teeth with pliers he also uses to shoe horses. Zero anesthesia, zero empathy, and a scream that echoes to the next village. And then there's bathing. That is, the lack of it. Because according to the medical logic of the time, water opens the pores, and open pores are like wide open doors for sin and the devil's diseases. In other words, the dirtier, the more protected. The grime forms a holy layer of bacterial protection, a shield made of dried sweat, human grease, and emotional dust. Bathing in this context was almost a theological suicide. But you still think about washing because you itch so much it feels like you were born inside a beehive. The problem is that to do so, you'd have to heat water in a cauldron, fill a wooden tub, carry buckets from the well, and of course, run the risk of being caught naked, which besides being immoral is risky, because someone will always think your naked body is an offense to the divine order. Result, caught in the bath, accusation, heresy, bonfire. Even so, you try. You stick your feet in a barrel of rainwater, freezing, murky, with mosquito larvae and the smell of wet leather. You feel a shiver, not from cold, from disgust. But at least your feet are slightly less crusty. The rich, those who live in castles with windows and real mattresses, do have private baths. But don't get your hopes up. It's not a spa. It's a foul-smelling wooden tub with water reused by everyone in the house. The feudal lord starts, then his wife, then the children, and finally the servants. The resulting broth would be enough to plant 3 hectares of diseases. And when bathing happened in public, as in the collective bathhouses, the situation took on a scandalous twist, because the bathhouses quickly became hotspots for gossip, sin, and eventually brothels. The church, seeing this, went crazy and shut most of them down, because a pure-smelling person is better than a clean sinner. Meanwhile, on your body, the itching evolves into inflammation. The skin starts to open up in small sores. One of them is oozing. You ignore it because everyone has something oozing. It's almost a fashion statement. The smell of pus blends with the ambience and disappears into the overall work. Your hair, for example, hasn't seen soap since the last harvest. It has taken on a life of its own. There are nests, there are insects, there are layers. Combing it is an impossible concept. You shave it off with a dull knife when desperation overcomes fear. The scalp burns and bleeds, but now you have fewer lice. Victory. By the way, speaking of blood, boils, wounds, and tumors appear from time to time. You pray it's not the plague, but if it is, oh well. The body swells, the skin darkens, the eyes turn dull, and then, well, you start to be avoided. People make the sign of the cross when they see you, throw salt at you, run, and close their doors. Because medicine doesn't understand the disease, but it understands fear. And if you survive all that, congratulations. It's a miracle. But don't get excited. You can still die of tetanus from stepping on a rusty wire, or from an infection by picking a pimple, or from chronic insomnia caused by itching, coughing, snoring, and children screaming at 3 in the morning. And yes, it's only just the beginning of the morning. As the night deepens and the entire hut creaks with the sounds of sniffles, spontaneous flatulence, and pig hooves scraping the packed earth floor, you realize something curious about the Middle Ages. No one has privacy, ever. Not for 1 second. You live surrounded by people, people breathing, coughing, praying, watching you sleep, with that vacant stare of someone who has already accepted the end of times, even though it's Tuesday. Having a social life in the Middle Ages is easy. Everyone is stuck together all the time. There are no locking doors, no separate rooms. The concept of being alone hasn't been invented yet. You want some time to yourself? Forget it. Your wife, your kids, your paralyzed uncle, the dog, the visiting friar, and a random duck are all there, in the same partition of the same room, sharing the same air, the same smell, and the same parasites. The conversations, of course, are uplifting. They revolve around 3 topics: the weather, the harvest, and who died this week, or who is about to die, which also generates good commentary. A neighbor who coughed differently already becomes a topic. The widow's daughter was seen staring too long at the fireplace. Witchcraft. The blacksmith seemed sad. Demonic possession, or a hangover. Both are treated with coarse salt and a couple of slaps. Medieval gossip didn't have WhatsApp, but it had the church. And nothing spreads faster than a rumor whispered between one Hail Mary and the next. You don't even need to leave the house. Someone always shows up to tell you that so-and-so was seen picking strange mushrooms, or that what's-her-name stopped going to mass and is now probably sleeping with the devil in the woods. Speaking of the woods, a separate chapter in the medieval manual of fears. Entering the woods is to risk your soul. It's the territory of beasts, of spirits, of bandits, of hermits who talk to the wind. The trees hide sins, and every cracking branch is a sign that something is watching you. If you really want to die, go into the woods at night. If not, avoid even thinking about it. The medieval forest is the ancestral equivalent of hard mode in life, and if the forest is already terrifying, the spiritual world, oof. The medieval mind is a catalogue of existential fears. Hell is more real than bread. Demons lurk in every shadow, and anything out of the ordinary is automatically satanic. A left-handed child, a woman who reads, a man who doesn't like ale, it's all a sign. Everything is suspicious. Everything is a potential bonfire. Judgments are swift, based on logic. Yes, but a logic that would challenge the bravest mathematician. If you have a wart, it's because you made a pact with the devil. If you had a strange dream, it's because you received a prophetic vision, or you're possessed. If you can sing too well, maybe you're a bard sent by the Antichrist. Better cut out your tongue before you enchant the village. Sexuality is also a minefield of repression and extravagance. People marry young, very young, like you're 12 years old and you already have a 43-year-old fiancé who also has 2 kids and a cough that won't go away. Marriage is a contract, not a romance. The Tinder of the era is called agreement between fathers. If your family has a cow and the other side has a sheep, congratulations, you're engaged. It's that simple. Love exists, but it's well hidden and very risky. Showing affection can be seen as weakness, or worse, as something sinful. Everything must pass through the filter of the church. Kissing too much, lust, touching, sacrilege, having sex and enjoying it, pure heresy. The ideal is to procreate in silence, in the dark, after praying an Our Father and promising never to smile again. And homosexuality, better not even mention it. Any deviation from the normative script is treated with stones, fire, or banishment. Literally. There's no discussion, no debate, no let's talk. There is only judgment, punishment, and a line of people ready to point fingers with a torch in their other hand. Even so, people socialize because they have no choice. The village is a single collective organism, and you are just one cell trying not to become necrotic. The local tavern is the main meeting point. There, you drink ale, which is more trustworthy than water, and tell the same old stories, preferably exaggerated. Everyone has a relative who survived a wolf attack or fled from a headless horseman. Sometimes there's music, an out-of-tune lute, a drum made of goat skin, a guy clapping off beat. Dancing is allowed, as long as it doesn't look too good. If it looks sensual, The priest gets up from his chair and shuts it all down. In the end, no one can be excessively happy. It's dangerous. And the fears continue. Fear of hunger, fear of the plague, fear of sin, fear of laughing at the wrong time and being accused of conspiracy, fear of looking at a monk the wrong way, fear of thinking, fear of living too long, fear of dying too soon, fear of being you. You wonder if anyone there is genuinely happy. The answer is probably not, but no one knows because there's no time to reflect. Between fleeing leprosy, carrying stones, praying compulsively, and avoiding being burned alive, people just get on with it. No plan, no rest, no questions. And incredibly, there are still people who sing, who smile, who plant flowers in the middle of the mud. Perhaps to remember that even in the Middle Ages, life offers you a minimal chance to forget for a few seconds that you are absolutely, completely screwed. The sun rises again, at least that's what they say, because from inside the hut, the light barely gets in. There's more smoke than clarity. Your throat scrapes before you even open your eyes. And it's not just the cold. It's the poorly made fire from last night, which instead of providing warmth, only managed to turn the atmosphere into a kind of luxury-free, water-free sauna that smells like burnt cloth and toenails. You wake up to the sound of a chicken, but it's not a bucolic sound. It's the desperate squawk of a creature that shares your living space and, for some reason, decided your hair was a good place to sleep. It's not the chicken's fault. It just lives here. Same as the pig now grunting near the pot, or the dog that ate a piece of your tunic while you slept. It's the Horror Farm Compact Edition. You get up with the slowness of someone who knows what awaits them. No hot coffee, no fresh bread, no yogurt with chia seeds. What awaits you is a clay pot that hasn't been washed since the last pope took office, with a liquid inside that vaguely resembles soup, but only if you close your eyes and have a lot of imagination. The mixture stinks, like everything in the Middle Ages, but you eat it anyway because being hungry is worse. The contents of the bowl are the same as yesterday, maybe with a new cabbage leaf, maybe with an extra fly. The consistency varies between dirty water and unknown root cream. The floating chunks have textures that defy logic. Some are crunchy, some melt, one or two squeak. You pretend not to notice. As you chew with the force of a resigned horse, you try to think of something positive like, at least I still have teeth. But then you remember one of them is loose, the other is black, and the one in the back has a hole big enough for a bean. It's a cavity festival. Outside, the world is calling you, not with flowers or birdsong, but with the hoarse cry of someone coughing up a lung and asking for help carrying hay. And off you go. Barefoot, of course, because your footwear, that thing made of leather and hope, broke last week. You tried to fix it with a piece of rope, but the rope became a refuge for bedbugs, so you accept the mud between your toes as a morning gift from medieval nature. The walk is long, not in distance, but in suffering. Every step is a negotiation with the muck. Your ankles crack, the wind cuts, your nose drips, and you're dressed like a monk who lost his faith and his dignity. Everything itches, everything is uncomfortable, everything smells like 3 weeks without a bath. In the village square, a common scene, a group of people watching a public trial. You don't know who the accused is, but it doesn't matter. It could be a thief, it could be someone who said ouch at the wrong time, it could just be someone with a wart on their chin. The important thing is that there will be yelling, whipping, and maybe a little stoning. Morning entertainment with the bonus of not having to pay for a ticket. You detour because you still need to collect your daily ration. Not that there's food distribution, but you work in exchange for a handful of grain, and, if the weather cooperates, maybe half an onion. Exactly. A whole onion is for nobles. You, if you're lucky, scrape off a piece with your knife and save the rest for another day. You divide your tears between the sting of the onion and the sadness of existing. On the way, someone stops you. a monk with a serious look and a finger raised. He talks about sin, about how the world is corrupt, about how suffering is the only way to get closer to God. You nod at everything, mainly because you're too hungry to argue, and also because he's carrying a staff. And a staff in this era has more authority than a diploma. You get back home and see your wife mending her own clothes with thread made of hair, literally. Sewing thread is expensive, so you use what you have. You think about helping, but you don't know how to sew. And to be honest, you're more worried about the blister that has appeared between your toes. The blister is throbbing. It seems alive. You consider popping it, but you remember your cousin who died from that. Yes, a blister, an infected toe, fever, delirium, the end. By the way, talking about death is easy in the Middle Ages. It's everywhere. On the table, inside the pot, in the baby's cradle. There's no life insurance, no hospital, no early diagnosis. There's prayer, there's coarse salt, there's bloodletting. And if it doesn't work, too bad. God willed it. And strangely enough, we haven't even reached half of the absurd things this era carried with pride. The food, the work, the religion, the fears. It all seems like something from a distorted reality show episode, set in a parallel universe where hygiene was cancelled by divine decree. You keep going, you always keep going, because the Middle Ages doesn't offer choices, only dirty paths and sharp stones. And every now and then, a potato if you're lucky. If in practical life you're already used to mud, turnips and foot fungus, in your love life, things don't get any better. Because falling in love in the Middle Ages was essentially a logistics problem. It starts with the basics. You don't choose anyone. Your parents choose, or your feudal lord, or God, according to the mystical aunt in the village. You're betrothed before you even know how to read, which, to be fair, you'll never know how to do anyway. With luck, the chosen person has a minimum number of teeth. Without luck, it's just someone with an acceptable dowry and a personality comparable to a moldy wall. Romanticism is a concept that only exists in the Psalms, and even then only in Latin. No one writes love letters, partly because writing is a luxury for the clergy. So, if you like someone, you have to show it in your own medieval way, by averting your gaze at the market, offering a piece of turnip or not spitting when that person walks by. Those are the limits of passion. And no, there's no dating, no courtship, no matching on Tinder. The process is direct, married and done. And usually, the marriage happens early, like really early. Girls at 12, boys at 14, and everyone thinking this is completely normal. You're still learning to deal with lice, and you already have to deal with a mother-in-law. It's not what you'd call healthy emotional development. The ceremony is, to say the least, curious. First, because it depends on the church's approval, and the church approves almost anything as long as they get paid. But the marriage can happen without a priest, without witnesses, without music. Sometimes it's just a handshake, a poorly spoken phrase, and boom, eternal union. If someone complains later, tough luck. Hell awaits those who break oaths, even those made under duress and desperation. After the wedding comes the honeymoon, or rather, the night of the contract's confirmation. The couple is led to the bed, often under the watchful eyes of family and friends who stay there to make sure. Well, it happened. Exactly, an audience, because privacy, as we've said, is heresy, and the social function of a couple is to procreate. Not to love each other or have fun. Just procreate. With gusto and without suspicious noises. Married life is a roller coaster of obligations and disappointments. Women, for example, must be submissive, chaste, silent, and fertile. Almost a decorative plant, just with maternal functions. Men, on the other hand, must provide. Which means working until you drop, coughing until you bleed, and still having the energy to produce heirs. Because without heirs, the bloodline dies. And if the bloodline dies, God cries, or something like that. And don't think cheating was rare. It was common, very common. Just, of course, with a double standard. If a man cheated, it was a mistake of the flesh. If a woman cheated, it was witchcraft, followed by a trial, confiscation of property, and maybe a basic bonfire. Fidelity, in general, was a concept shaped by male convenience and religious paranoia. Oh, and speaking of religion, let's talk about clerical celibacy, that glorious tradition that mixes sexual repression with mystical outbreaks. Monks and priests were supposed to live without touching anyone, without feeling desire, without even looking with intention. Except, of course, theory and practice don't always align. Historical records show a reality much more carnal than they'd like to admit. Monasteries with illegitimate children, priests who kept mistresses, and confessions that sounded like soap opera scripts. And the punishment for that depended on the bishop's mood and the amount of money involved. Marriages between nobles were a separate spectacle. They united families, sealed alliances, and involved more politics than feeling. Sometimes the couple didn't even know each other. They'd see each other at the altar, and that was that. Afterward, they'd each sleep in a different wing of the castle and keep discreet or not so discreet lovers. But it was all fine. As long as the bloodline continued, everyone turned a blind eye. Divorce, almost non-existent. It was easier to convince the church that the marriage never happened than to separate. So they'd invent excuses: close kinship, cousins, impotence, lack of consent. In extreme cases, someone would become a monk. Because nothing says, "I can't stand this marriage anymore," like locking yourself in a monastery and spending the rest of your life copying psalms in Latin. Public displays of affection were rare. A kiss, a touch, a hug. All of that could be interpreted as lust. Unless, of course, it was carnival. Yes, there was a kind of medieval carnival. And it was precisely during these periods of controlled revelry that the people let off steam. Masks, drinks, obscene dances, and even comical enactments of fake weddings. It was the Middle Ages saying, "Okay, you can let loose, but only for this week." And in the midst of all this, there's you. A human being trying to feel affection, receive kindness, be seen as a person. But the system treats you like a cog, a reproducer, a functional part of society, a body with functions. And love. Love, if it appears, has to be quick, silent, and hopefully reciprocated. You wonder if it's worth it, if it's worth the effort to love in a world where everything smells like punishment. But then you see someone smiling, even without teeth. An affectionate gesture, an out-of-tune song, a child chasing a duck. And you think, maybe there's still some tenderness, even here. But not for long, because the bell is ringing. It's time for Mass. You finish the moldy turnip soup, survive the night of shared itching with fleas, and you realize that despite the back pain and the blister now throbbing on your left foot, you're still alive. Which in the Middle Ages is always a surprise. But like any good peasant, first things first, before work, before pain, before physical punishment or stale bread, you need to make the sign of the cross. Because if you don't give thanks for the misfortune that is your life, maybe it will get worse. Spoiler, it can always get worse. Religion isn't just a part of your life, it is your life. Or rather, the only plausible explanation for why you're still alive, even while eating grey cheese and breathing smoke. You pray, you kneel, you believe. Because deep down, it's easier to think there's a divine plan behind all this than to accept that existence is just a tasteless accident. The fear of going to hell is real, very real, and much closer than it seems. A sneeze at the wrong time could be a sign of possession. An out-of-place laugh could be demonic temptation. Thinking too much is already considered vanity, and anything that is vanity leads to eternal fire. In other words, thinking, smiling, breathing with a certain enthusiasm. It's all risky. The church is everywhere, and even when it's not, it rules over everything. The priest is a figure of supreme authority. He can bless your marriage, judge your soul, and decide whether or not you deserve to be buried with dignity, which means in a grave, not thrown into a mass pit full of sinners. That's the most you can hope for in medieval mortuary dignity. You attend Mass in Latin, even though you don't understand a word. But don't worry, nobody understands. Not even the priest sometimes. It's the intention that counts. And the intention here is not to go to hell. You feign attention, put on a repentant face, and repeat the gestures your grandmother used to make. Nobody really knows what they're doing, but everyone is afraid of not doing it. If you sin, spoiler, you've already sinned just by existing. The path is confession. You enter the confessional, kneel, and list your spiritual crimes. I ate too much, half a potato. I coveted the blacksmith's wife, even though she has a thicker mustache than he does. I doubted the existence of purgatory because someone asked what it was. The priest listens to it all, pretends to care, and tells you to pray 50 Hail Marys. Done. You're saved. For now. But if you sin a lot, then it gets complicated. Then you need to pay for indulgences, which are basically a ticket to try not to go to hell. You give money to the church, and it promises that God will take it into consideration. It doesn't guarantee heaven, but it might guarantee you less time sizzling in purgatory. It's like a loyalty program, only eternal and with no cashback. You can also buy relics, holy objects, pieces of Christ's cross. Apparently there was enough wood to build a shopping mall. Fingers of saints, Mary's tears, vials of air from heaven, or even apostles' teeth. Of course, 99% of this stuff is blatant forgery, but you believe because believing is more comfortable than questioning. And questioning can lead you straight to the bonfire. Speaking of bonfires, if you show any thought that's too far outside the standard, like saying, maybe the universe doesn't revolve around the earth, or maybe a woman can read a book, that's it. Heretic. Trial, punishment, and if things escalate, a human barbecue in the center of the village with an audience. The children watch, the adults comment, and everyone goes home even more afraid to think. Religion also dictates your calendar. The days of the week don't matter much. What matters are the saints. Today is St. Bartholomew's Day, tomorrow is St. Gertrude's. Nobody knows who they are, but you respect them. Because every one of those saints, even the ones with names that sound like jokes, can influence your harvest or your intestinal health. Better not to risk it. And the fasts. The fasts. In theory, they are demonstrations of faith. In practice, they are organized excuses for you to be hungry with purpose. No meat today. But meat was already rare anyway, so people just pretend they're being devout while eating soggy bread. And with luck, some mud-flavored fish, a spiritual delicacy. The monks, isolated in monasteries, live in silence, writing, praying, and eventually going mad from so much seclusion. They copy books by hand, letter by letter, with ink that's sometimes made from wine, sometimes from animal blood. And they spend months making a single decorated letter A. It's art, they say. But it's also the result of years without social contact. And the afterlife. That's the grand prize, the great comfort. Because if life here is this earthly purgatory that tastes like goat urine, heaven has to be worth it. The promise is beautiful. Green fields with no pain, no hunger, no mother-in-law, just peace, music, and a smiling God. But to get there, you need to suffer. A lot. The more you suffer, the better. Suffering is your celestial resume. You realize then that everything revolves around this. Pain with purpose. Life isn't meant to be good. It's meant to be endured. With faith, with obedience, with humility, and with your knee always ready for another prayer or a tripping hazard. Deep down, you no longer know if you truly believe or if you're just afraid of burning, but you continue, because in the Middle Ages, believing is the only way not to go completely insane, and also because there's nothing else to do, no Wi-Fi. The day is more than half over, and despite the complete absence of positive stimuli, your stomach insists on reminding you it still exists. You feel hungry. Not that light hunger of someone who skipped a snack, but a hunger that seems to have lived inside you for generations. A hunger that resonates in your bones, that growls, that begs, but that unfortunately will be answered with a bowl of thin gruel. Eating in the Middle Ages is an exercise in resignation. You don't make choices. You eat what's available. And what's available is basically what was left over, or what almost rotted, but is still in an acceptable stage of mold. If you're a peasant, your daily dish revolves around three main ingredients: hard bread, something fermented that no one can identify, and hope. The bread, by the way, is almost always black, made with poorly ground flour mixed with straw, sand, and sometimes tree bark. Not for culinary creativity, but out of necessity. Scarcity turns everything into potential food. The cheese, the cheese, a medieval classic. It exists, yes, but with an aroma so potent it could be considered a chemical weapon in modern times. The mold is visible. The colors vary between beige, green, and something that glows. But you eat it because it has protein, and because your body lost its sense of self-preservation about 2 winters ago. Meat. Yes, it exists, but only if you're rich or very lucky. And even then it comes dry, salted to the soul, and with the texture of a river stone. Sometimes the butcher sells horse meat or dog meat or anything that walks and eventually dies. The important thing is to slice it thin and hide the smell with garlic, onion, and prayers. Fish is more common, especially if you live near a river. But it's also a fish that lived in the same river where people wash clothes, dump feces, and every now and then, corpses. In other words, eating fish in the Middle Ages is like playing Russian roulette with E. coli. And there are vegetables, not many, not pretty, but they're there. Turnips, and occasionally another type of turnip with a different name. Potatoes hadn't arrived from the Americas yet, so don't dream of mashed potatoes. The closest you'll get is a paste of fermented peas that tastes like a wet sock. It serves as a side dish or as punishment, depending on the occasion. Fruits, yes, but only in the right season. And even then, you have to eat them quickly because if they rot, they go to the pig. And if the pig rejects them, maybe they can still be used to make wine. The criteria are subjective, very subjective. Fermentation, by the way, is the #1 survival technique. Everything is fermented: milk, grain, even sanity. Water itself is a separate problem. Drinking pure water is a luxury because there's no plumbing, no chlorine, no filter. The well water tastes like metal, mud, and microscopic life, which translated means guaranteed diarrhea. That's why many people opt to drink weak ale, the so-called small beer. It doesn't get you drunk, it doesn't quench your thirst, but at least it doesn't send you to the great beyond with the first sip. If you're in a castle, things change a bit, but not necessarily for the better. Nobles have access to exotic meats, yes, peacock, swan, wild boar, and even porcupine if fashion dictates. But they also have cooks who love to experiment, like mixing fruit with meat, sugar with garlic, and cooking everything until it becomes a textureless mush. Because presentation was not the strong suit of feudal cuisine, a noble banquet table is long, loud, and completely without etiquette. Everyone eats with their hands, uses their sleeves to wipe their mouths, burps without shame, throws bones on the floor, and from time to time fights over a bigger piece. Which is elegant, considering no one has bathed in weeks. Desserts are rare. When they exist, they involve honey, nuts, and of course more flour. Everything served in communal bowls, because the concept of an individual plate is modern heresy. And if you're lucky, someone might leave a little bit. If you're unlucky, all that's left is the smell. And yes, sweets existed, but sugar was imported, expensive, and treated almost like an illicit drug. Only the very rich tasted it. The rest of the people sweetened with honey, or simply gave up on being happy. Back to your reality as a toothless peasant. Dinner is the same as lunch and breakfast. a dark broth with a piece of bread floating in it, and the sound of someone chewing desperately next to you. You look at the bowl and wonder if all this is worth it, if living on soup and fear is really a divine plan. But deep down, you know you have no choice. You eat, you swallow, you cough, and you pray you don't wake up with a stomachache. Because going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, in the cold, with a torch in hand and a crow watching you, is not an experience you want to repeat. And yet, you will repeat it, every day. Because in the Middle Ages, the menu of life doesn't change. It's turnip for breakfast, turnip for lunch, turnip for dinner. And if you complain, there's still turnip as punishment. You wake up with the sun hitting your face. And not because you're on vacation at a resort, it's because your window, a hole in the mud wall covered with cloth, has torn again. The wind gets in, the light gets in, and reality gets in. That unpleasant old friend, dragging you from the straw with the delicacy of a mule kick. There's no alarm clock, but there's the village bell. And when it rings, you know, it's time to work again. Because in the Middle Ages, rest is a privilege reserved for statues of saints. You get up with your body complaining and a legitimate question, how am I not dead yet? Work here isn't a career. There's no LinkedIn, no promotion plan, no positive feedback. Your position is defined at birth, usually based on how many sheep your family doesn't have. If you were born a peasant, congratulations, you'll die a peasant. And if you're born noble, well then your job is to hunt, eat, go to war and judge others. But since you, tired listener, clearly weren't born noble, at least not in this historical incarnation, let's get to what matters. The common toil. The day starts before the sun comes up. With luck, you chew on a piece of bread soaked in whatever was left of last night's broth. With bad luck, not even that. Then you grab the hoe or the shovel or the stick for beating clothes. Any tool that quickly transforms you into a set of sore muscles covered in mud. You walk to the field. It's several miles. Always. The village was built with the logic of optimized suffering. Everything is far, everything is uphill, everything is full of obstacles. On the way, you trip over stones, sink into the mud, and get overtaken by a donkey that seems to be going somewhere better than you. When you arrive at the plantation, which mind you isn't even yours because you're just a serf, the real ritual begins. Dig, plant, harvest, carry, repeat. All manual, all repetitive, all slow. The earth is hard, ungrateful, and seems to hate you personally. The sun punishes, the rain sinks you, and sometimes it hails. Because why not? The medieval sky has a sense of humor. If it's harvest time, it's even worse. Because harvest means hurry, it means the feudal lord wants results. And if you don't deliver his share, which is 90% of what you plant, you can prepare to lose your straw, your food, and maybe even your freedom. Social justice hasn't arrived here yet. While you're working, the feudal lord isn't. He's hunting or drinking or arguing with the bishop about who has the better right to exploit the people. A philosophical debate with very real implications, especially on your back. But maybe you have another role in the village. You could be a weaver, waking up and spending the day pulling threads, weaving cloth, scratching your eyes, and breathing in wool lint. You could be a blacksmith. And then, your function is basically to hit hot metal with a heavy hammer until you lose all feeling. You could be a baker and spend the day in ovens that look like portals to hell, or a barber who is also a dentist, surgeon, and occasional exorcist in his spare time. If you're a woman, the routine isn't lighter. On the contrary, you wake up, prepare food with the same 3 ingredients as always, take care of the children, who are always sick, sew clothes with improvised needles and thread made from animal hair, and you also help in the field. All this while trying to avoid being accused of witchcraft for speaking too loudly or knowing about herbs. Oh, and there's child labor. Children aren't the future of the nation. They are compact labor. From a young age, they learn to carry, wash, harvest, and obey. Playing, only if there's time left over. And even then, the games involve more dirt and bruises than fun, like betting on who can hold their hand in the well's ice water the longest. The work is constant. The only break comes on Sundays, and even then, only until Mass is over. After that, you have to prepare for the week. Mending, fixing, storing, and if you're lucky, sleeping a little without being woken up by a rat, a thunderclap, or someone screaming that they saw a shooting star, which, of course, is a sign of the end times. The curious thing is that even with this infernal routine, people still believe that work is a blessing, because that's what they were taught, that Adam sinned, and that's why everyone now has to sweat to live. You don't question it. You just dig, while singing a sad song about harvesting wheat and waiting for death. But beware, if you're an artisan, life doesn't get better. You spend weeks making a chair, a cup, or a broom, and you sell it for 3 coins that barely pay for the next meal. And if someone doesn't like your work, they can accuse you of fraud or sorcery or both. In the city, the rhythm changes, but the suffering continues. Apprentices live like slaves to the masters, sleeping on the workshop floor, working until their fingers bleed. And if they learn well, one day they can have their own workshop and repeat the cycle with their own apprentices. A 1,000-year-old tradition of intergenerational exploitation. You end the day with your muscles screaming and your eyes burning. You sit on the floor with no strength left even to complain. You eat whatever there is. You wash your face with well water and fall asleep thinking, will it rain tomorrow? Because if it rains, maybe the field will flood, and then you lose everything, including hope. And if it doesn't rain, well, the heat will kill you anyway. After an entire day of planting, sowing, carrying, being judged by the priest, and being bitten by at least 2 different types of lice, all your body wants is to lie down, and so you lie down. But don't expect Egyptian cotton sheets or memory foam pillows. What awaits you is a straw mattress, literally, placed on the packed earth floor. It smells like smoke, sweat, and accumulated sadness. The mattress really is a bag of rough cloth stuffed with hay. Yes, the same hay that the pigs use as a bathroom, and it itches a lot. With every turn you make, a new spike lodges itself in your skin. You no longer know if it's discomfort or if you're being punished for some sin you committed at age 6. Spoiler, it's probably both. But oh well, you lie down. You cover yourself with a piece of thick cloth which is technically a blanket. In practice, it's a damp, heavy cloth that does more to keep the smell of sweat trapped against your body than to keep you warm. Because yes, it's cold. And not a pleasant autumn night cold, but a medieval cold, one that cuts through layers of clothing and settles directly into your soul. You try to find a position, but the hay rustles. A rat scurries underneath. The child next to you starts coughing. The pig in the corner grunts, and the wind blows through the wall as if it has no respect for anyone. The feeling is like sleeping inside a barn shared with ghosts who have a cold. And that's just how it is, because in the Middle Ages, everyone sleeps in the same place. Father, mother, children, aunt, grandmother, domestic animals, sometimes a lost traveler. There are no separate rooms. The concept of a bedroom is still in beta. There's only one space. The bed is also one, or rather the floor. Whoever is lucky sleeps near the wall. Whoever isn't sleeps in the middle and becomes a collective pillow. The darkness is total because candles are expensive. So except for a dying ember in the back of the fireplace, there is no light. And in the absence of nightly entertainment, sleep should come naturally. But it doesn't. Because your body aches, the itching intensifies, your head throbs, and your mind, that damned thing, starts to work. Did the pig escape? Will the harvest be any good? Is that spot on my foot getting bigger? And of course, there's the noise. The Middle Ages are not silent. It's a symphony of coughs, sneezes, snores, involuntary flatulence, and people talking in their sleep. The neighbor upstairs, because yes, you can live in a hut with a second floor, has frequent nightly fights with his wife. And when he's not fighting, he's singing. Badly, but with passion. Oh, and we can't forget the critters. Not the domesticated ones, but the others. The ones that live in the cracks, in the dark corners, under the straw. Ticks, fleas, bedbugs, lice. An entire fauna sharing the bed with you. If you're warm, they come. If you're sweaty, they're grateful. And if you're bleeding, well, then it's a banquet. The itching never stops. It starts with one behind your ear, then on your ankle. Then you realize something is walking on the back of your neck. You try to ignore it, but you can't. And there's no repellent, no cream. There's only vinegar, and with luck, an amulet your grandmother says wards off bugs. Spoiler, it doesn't ward them off. Even so, between one discomfort and another, you doze off. But medieval sleep isn't continuous, it's divided. People would wake up in the middle of the night not from insomnia, but because it was cultural. They even had names for it, the first sleep and the second sleep. The pause in between was used to pray, think about life, or just stare at the ceiling in silence while listening to the neighbor burp. In this in-between sleep, some people wrote, others prayed. Most just waited for their bodies to give up again, because dreaming in that era was dangerous. It was said that dreams could be messages from God or temptations from the devil. It depended on the content and the priest's mood. If you talked loudly in your sleep, that was it, already grounds for village gossip. So-and-so had a nightmare. What's her name spoke in tongues while sleeping. The child laughed during the night. All of this could be a sign of possession, or worse, of moral deviation. Yes, laughing in your sleep could be considered an unconscious sin, because apparently even while sleeping you had to maintain your composure. And if by chance you toss and turn too much and end up kicking someone, which is common since there's not much space, you can be sure you'll get a shove back, or an elbow, or a passive-aggressive pinch, followed by an angry whisper in the dark. After all, collective sleeping etiquette demands boundaries, within reason. In the small hours of the morning, you wake up again, not because of the segmented sleep, but because it started to rain and the thatched roof never holds. A drip starts right above your forehead. You try to ignore it, pretend you don't hear it, but you do, and it grows. And it drips directly onto your eyelid every 5 seconds, timed by the devil himself. You get up to try and place a pot. You step on a cat. You scream quietly. You hit your shin on a bench. You drop the pot. You go back to the straw, now wet, and you give up. You're not sleeping tonight, maybe tomorrow, or in the next incarnation. Because in the Middle Ages, even the simplest act, closing your eyes, requires effort, faith, and an absurd tolerance for discomfort. And all of this, of course, without a mattress, without silence, and with a constant smell of mold, onion, and fermented sweat. And still, they slept, or something like it. You wake up, or rather you give up trying to sleep, with the feeling of being cooked from the inside. It's not a fever, it's accumulated sweat. Your body is wrapped in a sticky film of grease, dust, and what can only be described as bodily sadness. And the question that echoes even before dawn is today bath day? Short answer, no. Long answer, also no. The medieval relationship with water is complex. You know it exists. You know you can get in it. But that doesn't mean you're going to. Because bathing, my dear tired listener, was something done with caution, with a schedule and often with spiritual supervision. After all, bathing moves the body. And moving the body moves the soul. And moving the soul, well, that can lead to sin. Houses don't have showers, don't have sinks, don't even have a decent bucket. Sometimes the closest thing to a daily bath is splashing a little water on your face, if there is any, or rubbing a damp cloth under your arm. The so-called depressed cat's wash. And that's it, because for many a real bath happens once, maybe twice a year, if you're lucky. If it's winter, forget it. The water is ice, and if you dare to touch it, the punishment comes in the form of pneumonia. If it's summer, maybe you'll risk it in a river, along with 20 other sweaty bodies. Animals drinking, women washing clothes, and a pig floating by silently. It's a communal and contaminated experience. Soap exists, yes, but it's a rare item made with animal fat and ash. The smell is of defeat, and the result is a little less grime, but permanent olfactory trauma. Some people use herbs, others rub sand on their bodies, because in the absence of lather, the solution is to exfoliate until you remove your soul. The nobles, of course, have their luxuries, bathtubs, perfumes, towels, but even then, it's not as glamorous as it seems. The water is heated with firewood carried by servants and poured into wooden tubs that have seen more rear ends than a tavern. And nobody changes the water between baths. The first in line is the king, the last one gets a human broth. And dental hygiene, brushing your teeth is an alien concept. The most common practice is to rub charcoal on your teeth or chew on plant twigs and pray it doesn't pull out what's left of your dentistry. When it hurts, and it always hurts, the solution is to pray or ask the barber surgeon to pull it out without anesthesia. Just pliers, a knee on your chest, and "this will be over quick." The clothes, for their part, don't help. They are heavy, hot, and rarely washed. Because washing clothes is an event. It involves carrying pounds of fabric to the river, beating it against rocks, scrubbing it with homemade soap, rinsing 3 times, and then wringing it out with superhuman strength. That, of course, is without counting the stares of others, judging the state of your linen as if it were a dirty fashion show. And under the clothes, a lighter layer of fabric called underclothing, which absorbs sweat and shame. That part is washed more frequently, like once a month. If it's torn, it's mended. If it's walking on its own, it's incinerated or donated to the cousin who lives in the stable. Deodorant, don't even think about it. What existed was a small bag of herbs tied around the neck, like an anti-odor amulet, or strong perfumes used by the rich, which served more to disguise the stench than to please. The result? An aromatic environment that mixes roses, onion, and horse. Delicious. Ah, and hair. Women try to keep it clean with herbal infusions, but they rarely cut it. Men shave parts of their heads, especially the monks who adopt the bald with a hairy circle look, also known as the almost there. Lice are inevitable, and to combat them, wonderful recipes emerge like hot vinegar, rat ashes, and in extreme cases, controlled fire. Yes, fire. Nails, long, dirty, mysterious. Cutting your nails requires a knife, a moment of silence, and strong emotional resistance. And since nobody wants to lose a finger carelessness, many people just ignore them until they fall off on their own. Because the medieval body has its own rules of slow self-destruction. The feet, sad. They live wrapped in rags, in damp leather shoes, or just barefoot. Open wounds, calluses, fungus, blisters. Medicine calls it podiatry. The Middle Ages calls it, it's just a foot. And to complete this combo of emotional asepsis, we have the bathrooms, or rather the absence of them. In the countryside, you go in the woods. In the city, a bucket. And when the bucket is full, it's emptied out the window. It's not an exaggeration, literally thrown with a shout of warning, or not. The phrase, "look out below," gains real dramatic weight. Castles have latrines, holes in the floor with a free fall to a moat. The smell rises, dignity falls, and if you slip, well, you get the idea. Monasteries had rudimentary systems of running water, but if it clogged, someone had to clean it. And that someone, guess what, it wasn't the abbot. Even with all this, we have to be fair. The medieval person wasn't dirty by choice, it was by context. Due to lack of access, precariousness, forced ignorance, many people cleaned themselves as best they could, did the best with what they had. But what they had was next to nothing. You end the day smelling of smoke, dust, and salted meat. And still, when you lie down, you give thanks, because you're alive. Because tomorrow, maybe you'll manage to wash your hands. Because at the end of the day, hygiene is a luxury, and luxury doesn't sleep on straw. So, tired listener, did you think the smell of the Middle Ages was the worst part? Wait until you find out what was going on inside people's heads. Or rather, in yours, if you had the misfortune of living there. Because without science, without critical thinking, and with a lot of free time, you filled the day with superstition. A lot of superstition, and none of it makes sense. But you follow it anyway, because you don't want to wake up cursed with boils on your soul. Let's start with something basic, the sneeze. You sneeze, and you already feel the cold sweat on your back, because every achoo could be a portal for the devil to enter. The only salvation, cross your fingers, pray quietly, and accept that your soul is now in litigation. Oh, and someone has to shout, "Bless you," or "Jesus." Otherwise, the demon enters with power of attorney. If a north wind blows, you immediately close the window, make the sign of the cross, and start reviewing your sins. Because the north wind brings plague, the south wind witchcraft, and if there's no wind, then that's the end of the world. You learn that everything, absolutely everything, is a grim warning. Clear skies, punishment. Cloudy skies, punishment. Good harvest, suspicious. Bad harvest, of course, punishment. Did you spill salt? The first thing you do isn't to clean it up. It's to grab a pinch and throw it over your left shoulder, as if you just summoned a YouTube tutorial on how to avoid mystical death. Except salt is expensive, and wasting it is also a sin. So you live in this cycle of seasoned contradictions. Now, imagine you're about to get married. Instead of worrying about the clothes or the best man's speech, you're there, stacking loaves of bread. Yes, bread in a tower because tradition demands it. If the tower falls, bad luck for the marriage. If it stays up, you kiss your future spouse in the middle of the square and thank the sacred flower. None of it makes sense, but you obey. Because it's either that or the priest gives you the evil eye for all eternity. At the wedding itself, you have to be careful not to step into the church with your left foot, because apparently the left side is where the devil takes his vacations. Any misstep can turn into gossip, and medieval gossip has the power to become a formal accusation. You learn quickly, always with the right foot, literally, or you pray twice as hard afterward. And let's not even talk about what happens if you're widowed and want to remarry too quickly. The entire village shows up at your window, banging pots, shouting, playing out-of-tune music. It's called a charivari, a sonic lynching to punish your lack of proper mourning. You can't even start a new life without being humiliated to the sound of spoons hitting cauldrons. Now, brace yourself. You witness the trial of a pig, exactly. A pig accused of attacking a child, and you're there in the audience, watching the animal with a lawyer by its side, listening to the judge deliver the sentence. Sometimes the pig is exiled, sometimes it's executed. You just wanted some bread, but you got an afternoon of porcine court, feudal justice at its finest. And if you're unlucky, some neighbor will swear you have the evil eye. The reason? You looked at their crops for more than 3 seconds. Now any crop that fails will be blamed on you. You'll have to rub an onion on your forehead, wear a garlic necklace, and carry a dried rue branch in your socks. That is, if you don't want to be stoned while coughing. Of course, being a minimally irrational person, dreaming of an owl makes you think, what a random dream. But not in the Middle Ages. Here you wake up in a panic. An owl means misfortune, death, or worse, a surprise visit from your mother-in-law. You try to forget it, but the whole village wants to know what you dreamed. And if it's too weird, maybe a small bonfire is in order, just to be safe. And your sister's menstruation? Dangerous. According to local experts, it can curdle milk, wither plants, sicken horses, and even spoil wine. So of course she needs to stay isolated in a corner with 3 stones around her and a lit candle. Because safety first, right? Around your neck, you wear an amulet made from a wolf's tooth. Why? No one knows. But they say it wards off the evil eye, fever, hoarseness, and chatty mothers-in-law. Your house has a horseshoe nailed to the door, a chicken heart above the hearth, and a mummified toad under the bed. That's not decoration. It's medieval life insurance. If you're left-handed, congratulations, you're in trouble. Writing with the left hand is the devil's work. They force you to write with your right hand, even if it looks like you're drawing with your feet. And if they see you hammering a nail with the wrong hand, be careful. It might end in a light exorcism with expired holy water and the relics. You already spent half of what you had on a piece of St. Barnabas's finger. At least that's what the monk said. It could be a cow's tooth, sure, but are you going to risk it? The bone is there, wrapped in a rag, and you guard it as if it were a sacred USB drive. What if it cures your back pain, or your bad luck with the corn? For every problem you have, there's a mystical solution, a ritual, a symbol, a strong smell, and you participate in all of it, even if deep down you don't believe. Because honestly, better safe than sorry. The last time someone mocked a superstition, they spent 3 days vomiting chicken feathers. Coincidence? Maybe. But what if it wasn't? Deep down, you just wanted peace, fresh bread, a night without a charivari. But you don't get it, because in the Middle Ages, fear is the spice of daily life. And you, tired listener, live every minute trying not to trip over some invisible belief that someone invented on a cold dawn with too much time and too little wine. Good luck trying to escape the next superstition. You're not well. Something is wrong. A pain in your chest, a tremor in your leg, the feeling that maybe eating that grayish chicken last night wasn't a good idea. But there's no pharmacy, no Google, not even chamomile tea. There's the barber, yes, the barber, the one who cuts hair, shaves beards, and also pulls teeth, stitches cuts, performs bloodletting, and if you're not careful, does C-sections with a bread knife. Because in the Middle Ages, medicine is an elastic concept. You go to the barber, sit in the chair, which is also the operating table, and pray you leave with the same number of limbs you entered with. And the diagnosis? Simple. The barber looks at you, lifts your eyelid, pokes your tongue, and, the great classic, examines your urine. You hand him a small vial of your fresh pee, and he analyzes the color, the smell, and sometimes the taste. Exactly. He gives it that little technical taste test. Because according to the manuals of the time, urine with a sweetish taste might indicate something serious like, I don't know, a glycemic curse. The medical theory of the moment, the 4 humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you're sick, it's because one of them is out of balance. Are you melancholy? Too much black bile. Nervous? Yellow bile. Sleepy? Phlegm? Happy? Too much blood. And how is it resolved? By removing the excess. How? Bloodletting. You lie down. The barber ties a rope around your arm, picks a vein, and starts drawing blood. Exactly. You're already weak, and the solution is to lose more blood. Because logic, it's not even in the room. And if bloodletting doesn't help, don't worry, there are more methods. They can apply cupping, do bloodletting on your back, or even apply leeches. Yes, little sucking creatures stuck to you, as if it were a spa in reverse. But it doesn't end there. Sometimes the doctor decides your problem is in your internal heat. So he prescribes a suppository made of pig fat, wood ash, and a touch of herbs. Inserted, of course, by someone who also didn't want to be there. And you just lie there, praying your soul leaves before the smell does. And if the illness is spiritual, they send you straight to the priest. Because anything could be possession, a persistent hiccup, a small demon, a headache, an irritated spirit, diarrhea, divine punishment for gossiping at the fair, the cure, a light exorcism, a strong prayer, and fasting until your knees buckle. There are also the purges. Ah, the purges. You drink a concoction, usually made of things you don't even want to know, and you spend the day in the bathroom, or in the woods, or in a bucket, if you're lucky. Because the logic is clear. If something bad is inside you, it has to come out, even if it takes your dignity with it. And the remedies? Delicious. Mixtures of herbs, sour wine, mercury, animal feces, and dried toad parts. All very well ground, boiled, and delivered as a restorative tonic. You drink it, feel a strange warmth, a tingling on your tongue, and a sudden urge to re-evaluate your life choices. Cures. Sure. For open wounds, they use honey, which actually makes some sense, but they also use pigeon droppings, earwax, and sheep's blood. Why? Just because. Because someone one day thought it helped, and the rest of humanity decided not to question it. You look at your wound and wonder, would dying be so bad? And if the wound gets infected, spoiler, it's going to get infected. You're treated with a hot iron, direct cauterization, no anesthesia, just a piece of wood in your mouth to bite down on, and a man with a steady arm and little empathy. And afterward, they still say, "That was a close one, eh?" As if that's any comfort. Did you break your arm? There's no cast. There are pieces of wood, cloth, and hope. Sometimes the arm goes back into place. Sometimes you become the new symbol of the local tavern, with one elbow pointing to the horizon and the other to your own kidney. And when medicine fails, you seek out the healers. People who live in the woods, know herbs, talk to plants, and sometimes dance with a chicken on their head. Some of them actually help. Others make you drink hallucinogenic mushroom tea and converse with your grandmother's soul for an entire night. You wake up feeling light but without your pants. Oh, and of course, there are the religious remedies. You touch a holy relic, which let's admit could very well be a piece of an old chair. You pray and you wait. And if nothing improves, it's because your faith wasn't strong enough. Because in the Middle Ages, the patient is almost always to blame. And if you die, well, it happens. Nobody is that surprised. The barber just cleans the chair, wipes it down or not, and calls for the next one. Death is routine. The surprising part is surviving the treatment. And you complain about the waiting list for health insurance. You're walking through the village, barefoot, with a hard piece of bread in your pocket and 2 lice throwing a party on your scalp. Everything is normal until someone yells that a chicken was stolen. And just like that, a mob, a trial. And out of nowhere, you're summoned as a witness, even though you saw nothing. Because in the Middle Ages, justice is more about being in the wrong place at the wrong time than about facts. There's no CSI here, no DNA. There's only the judgment of God, literally. If someone is accused of theft, treason, or sorcery, there are 2 main paths. Either they beat them until they confess, or they undergo a divine test, also known as a test no one survives. The most famous is the trial by water. You're thrown into a river with your hands tied. If you float, you're guilty, a witch, a thief, or worse. If you sink and die, you're innocent. It's a very practical way to resolve the doubt. The only problem is that the verdict comes with a vital mortgage included. There's also the trial by hot iron. The court calls you, hands you a red-hot iron, and orders you to carry it for 3 paces. Then they bandage your hand for 3 days. If it has healed, it's a miracle. You're innocent. If it's infected, congratulations. You're guilty. And you'll probably die before the trial is over. But hey, problem solved. You witnessed such a case. A peasant was accused of wishing ill on his neighbor's cow. Yes, wishing. Just wishing. Someone said they saw him looking at the cow funny. The local justice, a guy with onion breath and dubious authority, decides to apply the needle test. They prick the guy in various parts of his body, looking for an insensitive spot that would indicate witchcraft. And you watch all this, holding a piece of bread and wondering if living in absolute silence wouldn't be a safer career path. And of course, there are the physical punishments: theft, cut off a hand, lied, cut out the tongue, sneezed at a suspicious time, a chain on your leg. The methods vary, but the goal is always the same: to make an example. You see people hanging in cages at the city entrance, rotting in the sun. Not as punishment, but as a billboard. You do the crime, you rot in time. And the torture instruments. A festival of sick creativity. There's the Iron Maiden, a sarcophagus full of spikes. There's the rack, a table that stretches your arms and legs until you become human spaghetti. There's the head crusher, a machine that slowly squeezes your skull. All very educational for those watching from a distance, of course, but not every trial is about crimes. Sometimes it's about property. You see two people fighting over a piece of land. The solution? A duel. Exactly. The court officiates a fight. One with a club, the other with a wooden shield, and the last one standing gets the land. A legal strategy based on brute force and zero arguments. And of course there's divorce by combat. Ever see a couple fight in the public square to decide who gets the property? The woman fights with rocks in a stocking. The man sits in a hole with one hand tied. Because balance, right? You try not to look, but you look. And then you try not to remember, but you remember. Witness. You're always summoned even if you don't know what they're talking about. Because here, all it takes is for someone to say, "He saw it," and boom, now you saw it. And if you lie, well, that's another trial, another torture, another episode of the series Medieval Justice Random Decisions Live. And the most ironic part, if you're noble, everything is different. Steal, you pay a fee. Kill, you apologize with flowers. Witchcraft, class eccentricity, you realize that justice is a flexible concept, especially when you have a title and shiny armor. Now, if you're a peasant, good luck. Accused, guilty, suspected, guilty, breathe differently. They're already looking for the stake. You learn to walk looking at the ground, not to cough in public, and to never ever argue with the blacksmith's son. But the height of absurdity is when you witness an animal trial. A pig that stepped in the priest's garden is being tried, with the right to a lawyer and everything, the sentence banishment from the village, and nobody thinks this is strange. It's just another Tuesday. In your head, all this piles up. A huge tangle of unwritten rules, twisted beliefs, and physical punishments. You live in fear of making a mistake without even knowing it. And you know what's worse, you're not always wrong. But sometimes the neighbor wakes up in a bad mood, and that alone is enough for your life to become a judicial torture episode with a special appearance by your mother crying in the background. And there, as you watch a man being flogged for stealing onions, you understand the concept of justice in the Middle Ages. It was simple. Whoever yells the loudest wins. Whoever has a sword rules. And whoever has nothing obeys and serves as a public example. And you complain about your HOA fines. You can't read or write, but that's okay. No one around you can either. In fact, if you write something minimally legible, they'll probably think you made a pact. Because in the Middle Ages, reading and writing was like flying. Only a few monks, priests, and nobles had that power. You, my dear tired listener, barely know how many letters are in your name. And even if you did, guess what? You don't have paper or a quill. You just have straw, charcoal, and time. Lots of time. Knowledge is a monopoly held by the religious. You want to learn something? You'll have to become a novice, spend your life kneeling on cold stone, copying verses in Latin that you don't understand, and getting scolded by a monk who has the breath of 7 fasts in a row. Oh, and no pencils with erasers. You write with a goose feather and ink made from soot, rust, or bug remains. Erasing only by scraping the parchment with a knife. Exactly. Every mistake becomes a small hole in the page. Every correction, a scrape. By the end of the text, the manuscript looks more like a battlefield than a divine message. And the books, rare, extremely expensive, and guarded like relics. A whole book can take months, sometimes years, to be copied by hand. Pages made of animal skin, covers reinforced with wood. You don't read a book. You carry a door with text on it, and even so, if you dare to ask to borrow one, they'll tell you you're better off selling your house and buying your own. But wait, maybe you're thinking, at least the children had school, right? No. School is a modern invention. What children have here is work, beatings, and a low life expectancy. If by chance a noble decides to found a school, It's more of a place to memorize verses and learn Latin without ever understanding what it means. You just repeat it, like a badly translated spell. And if you're born a woman, even worse, because female education is considered unnecessary. Why teach her to read if she's just going to sew and pray, says the medieval sage, while tying onions to his leg to cure rheumatism. If you're a woman and you know how to read, you already know, burn the evidence, literally. Now let's talk about the authority of knowledge. If it's written in the Bible or in an old manuscript, then it's true. It doesn't matter if it contradicts reality. If the text says the sun revolves around the earth, then the sun revolves. If it says women have fewer teeth than men, then they do. Nobody checks because questioning is heresy. And heresy, you know, leads straight to the stage of the torture theatre. The copyist monks are the influencers of the era. They decide what will be preserved and what won't. And it's not all Bibles. Sometimes they illustrate the manuscripts with peculiar drawings. There are naked monsters, rabbits with swords, bishops riding giant fish. Because yes, copying books for 10 hours a day makes anyone a little creative or disturbed. And there you are in the middle of all this, trying to understand why your life depends on texts you'll never be able to read. The truth is that knowledge is used as control. Knowing too much is dangerous. Knowing too little is expected. And you live in this limbo of semi-obligatory ignorance. There are also the monastic libraries, dark, silent places, smelling of old leather and burnt candle wax. You walk in there and you already feel like you're on sacred ground. The books are locked with chains. Chains, listener, as if they could escape. But who reads these books? Almost no one, because most are in medieval Latin, written in a calligraphy so complex it looks like an incantation. You even think about learning, maybe taking another step in life. But then you realize that to do that, you'd have to leave everything and become a servant of the church. Eat stale bread 7 times a week, wake up before the rooster, sleep in absolute silence, and spend your days copying phrases like, "Anger leads to eternal damnation," while your handwriting tries not to look like a cry for help. And if by chance someone shows up with a little more wisdom, like a doctor or an astronomer, they're treated with suspicion. Knowing too much? That's sorcerer's business. Better arrest him. Better burn him. Better tie him to a post and ask him loudly what he knows about the phases of the moon. So you just go on with life, memorizing things you don't understand, repeating words that sound like Latin but could just be religious stuttering, and living in a world where knowing is a risk, not a privilege. The icing on the cake. The only reading that's actually encouraged is of the church's stained glass windows. The colorful images tell biblical stories because, of course, no one can read the Bible. So you learn everything through pictures. Jesus, Mary, random dragons, people being impaled by demons, all in a window. Your religion class looks like a bloody graphic novel, and everyone accepts it. And there, as you try to copy your name with charcoal on a wooden wall, you realize that this, for you, is already a revolution. That writing 2 letters is almost heresy, and that understanding the world, well, it's not for you, it's for others. For someone richer, more religious, or just plain luckier. And you complain that your elementary school teacher was strict. You reek, but nobody cares, because everyone reeks with you. And in the Middle Ages, that's not just acceptable, it's practically desired. After all, bathing too much, and that is dangerous. It can open the pores and let the miasmas in. And you don't want miasmas. You don't know what they are, but you know they're bad. And everything you know about hygiene, you learned from rumors and fear. It starts with the basics, the bath, the frequency, extremely rare. You bathe once a season, at most. Sometimes only on religious holidays because they say too much water weakens the body. Some people go years without a real wash. They just rub a dry cloth on their face and call it spiritual cleansing. And the smell? Well, the nose gets used to it. And you pray that others reek more than you do, which is likely. And if by chance you decide to challenge the system and wash, you have to deal with the logistics. You go to a stream or wait for someone to heat water in a cauldron. The bathtub is communal, the water reused. The first one to use it comes out almost clean. The fifth one comes out with a new ecosystem stuck to their back. You get into the warm water and you feel particles. You don't ask what they are, you just accept. There are also the bathhouses, which are a concept that's half spa, half brothel, half war hospital, a chaos. Inside, people socialize, gossip, make deals, and sometimes hire extra services. You just wanted to wash your foot, but you leave with trauma, new lice, and a story you can't tell anyone. And your hair. You only wash it if it's a special event. On normal days, you put chalk powder, animal fat, or ash in it, all to seal in the dirt. It gets stiff, yes, but it's the fashion. The lice love it, and you've already given up fighting them. They're part of the family. They even have names. The one on your left shoulder is named Albert. Now let's talk about teeth. Brushing? Never heard of it. You chew on twigs or rub a dry cloth with wine? But the toothbrush doesn't even exist as a concept. The village breath is a combination of garlic, onion, infection, and bad decisions. And since sugar hasn't arrived in mass quantities yet, you ironically have fewer cavities than today. But your gums get inflamed, your teeth fall out, and you just suck on gruel until you die. Zero glamour. Deodorant? Sure. If you consider putting dried flowers in your armpit or rubbing sage on yourself. Some people just wear a bouquet hanging from their neck. It's not charm, it's aromatic desperation. Perfume is used to disguise the absence of a bath, not to seduce. And the stronger, the better. If it makes you cry when you smell it, it's ready for the dance and the clothes. You wear the same set for weeks. You wash it sometimes in the river with soap made from fat and ash, but the normal thing is to just turn it inside out. New layer, old smell. And if it has fleas, you pick them off one by one in an intimate moment with your own decay. Nails are cut with a knife. Ears are cleaned with straw. The nose, well, a finger solves that. And if a fart slips out in public, nobody cares. If someone does care, they're just too fancy. Flatulence is part of the soundscape. You hear more gas than bells, and the bells ring all the time. Now, beauty. That is relative. For some, having very white skin is a sign of nobility. So you put flour on your face, or even mercury, exactly. A poisonous touch of vanity to look paler, richer, more dead in life. If you're too rosy-cheeked, they send you out into the sun. If you're tanned, they call you a peasant. And if you have acne, it's a hex. Makeup exists, but it's made with lead, rancid fat, and charcoal. The eyeshadow runs, the blush burns, and the lipstick gives you a stomachache. Because sometimes, accidentally, you lick your own poison, and you keep on dancing. Because dying pretty is better than living stinking, or so they say. And body hair, nobody cares. Only some noble women pluck their eyebrows because a high forehead is in fashion. You, on the other hand, only worry if the lice have already built a nest. If the answer is yes, it's time to shave it all off and pretend it was an aesthetic choice. Hands are perpetually grimy, nails black, feet cracked. But that's not a sign of neglect. It's routine. It's the medieval visual identity. The smell of sweat and mud has already become your olfactory signature. You walk by, and even the dogs respect you, because the stench commands presence. And there, in the midst of this universe of glorified filth, you realize that the concept of hygiene is a social construct. And the Middle Ages, well, it didn't construct much in that regard. It just accepted, gave up, and went with the flow. Smelly, brave, resilient. And you complain about going 2 days without washing your hair. You wake up not because you want to, but because some strange music started in the square. An out-of-tune lute, 2 bells clanging off beat, and a bagpipe that sounds more like an asthmatic duck. It's a festival day. And a festival in the Middle Ages isn't joy. It's noise, confusion, and a potential collective outbreak. But you go, because you don't have much else to do, besides watching someone stumble around, dressed as a bear, and calling it culture. The first thing you notice is the smell. Always the smell. A mix of spoiled food, ancestral sweat, boiled wine, and a faint hint of almost rotten meat, which is, curiously, the star of the banquet. You're faced with a pie made of everything left over from last week, mixed with sugar and hope. What's inside? Don't ask. Just chew slowly and pray your soul doesn't leave your body in the process. Religious festivals are the liveliest because they involve a procession, flagellation, and if you're lucky, a little play with someone pretending to be the devil while children throw fruit at them. You participate with forced joy, clapping while your holy shoe gets soaked in blessed mud. It's spirituality with a hint of onion. Now, if the harvest was good, it's time for a peasant festival. In other words, drinking, aimless circle dancing, and a contest to see who can burp the loudest. You dance, or you try, because medieval music doesn't have a clear beat. It's more of a sequence of random sounds. You jump, you spin, you trip, and in the end, you pretend you had fun, but deep down, you feel like your ankle is about to become a legend. The nobles, of course, have their own parties, hunts, dinners, tournaments. You watch from a distance. You see knights trying to impale each other with lances for sport, while everyone applauds. You just think about the work of stitching all that armor back together afterward, and the real risk of someone dying. Because yes, the possibility of someone leaving without teeth is part of the fun, and if the noble is in a weird mood, he brings out the court jester. A guy who dresses like your grandmother's curtain and makes bad jokes while dancing. Sometimes they hit him for not being funny. Sometimes they hit him for being funny. The important thing is to entertain, and you laugh. Not because you find it funny, but because fear and laughter have the same sound in the Middle Ages. In the taverns, the atmosphere is more rustic. You walk in, slip on a greasy floor, order a wine that tastes like vinegar, and sit on a bench that creaks more than your spine. The bards play sad songs about plagues, dead loves, and lost cattle, and everyone sings along because collective misfortune is easier to swallow with a chorus. Sometimes a fight breaks out, over nothing. Looked at someone wrong? Fight. Sneezed too loud? Fight. Grabbed the wrong mug? Fight. You learn to keep your eyes on the floor, your voice low, and your elbow in a defensive position because punches come from everywhere. And in the end, they're all on the floor, laughing drunkenly and asking for another round of bread with raw garlic. The most sophisticated entertainment is the traveling theatre. A group comes to town, sets up a rickety wooden stage, and presents a story full of moralizing. You watch, sitting in the mud, while the lead actor puts on a deep voice and forgets his lines. The audience yells, laughs, throws vegetables. It's basically a 3-hour-long TikTok. If the main event of the day is capital punishment, that's where you'll find a crowd. Hanging, burning, decapitation. The whole village attends. People selling food, children on their parents' shoulders. It's an event. You watch, not knowing if you feel fear or boredom, because the execution, while brutal, is the medieval equivalent of the news of the week. Oh, and there's the Feast of Fools, where everything is inverted. The priest dresses as a clown, the beggar is king for a day, and everyone makes jokes about the church. For a few hours, anything goes. You participate, you laugh, you let loose. But of course, the next day, whoever took it too far is already tied up in the square. Freedom has a very short expiration date. You've also seen stone-throwing competitions, mud wrestling, pig races, and even a championship of who can hold their breath longest in a barrel of ale. Nobody knows who wins, because nobody remembers. They just wake up with a headache and promises never to participate again, until next week. And as you bite into a piece of cheese that should have retired 3 months ago, you think, is this fun? But then you realize that yes, it is. Because taking away the diseases, the hunger, the witchcraft accusations, and the constant risk of stepping in human excrement, laughing with others, is a rare luxury. and you take advantage of it. You learn to laugh at the absurd, to dance without music, to pretend you understood the play. Because in the Middle Ages, entertainment is ugly, uncomfortable, kind of gross. But at least it exists. And that, considering the rest of your life, is already almost a miracle. And you complain about parties with loud music. You have a stomachache, normal. You ate fermented bread with what looked like moss. But deep down, you're scared. Scared that it's not just an upset stomach. Because here, a pain can be divine punishment, the evil eye, or the work of a vengeful spirit from the forest. Medicine, we've already seen, you can't count on. So you appeal to the other belief system, superstitious chaos. You wear a figure charm around your neck, made from a chicken bone, to ward off the evil eye, envy, the plague, and maybe even hunger. Nobody really knows, but everyone has one. What works is the fear. And if everyone believes it works, that's half the battle. You spit on the ground 3 times before leaving the house, you knock on wood, and you avoid crossing paths with a black cat, or a white one, or any cat. Actually, cats are always suspicious. Witches, then, are the greatest collective terror. A woman with a wart who lives alone and talks to her plants? Witch. A lady who makes a tea that actually helps your cough? Witch. A young woman who smiles too much? Suspicious. And you've learned not to look at anyone for too long, because complimenting someone can also be a spell. And if you sneeze, someone immediately says, "God protect you," because the devil loves a vulnerable nose. You've seen people throwing salt over their shoulders, tying their hair in knots, sleeping with a boar's tusk under their pillow to dream of the future. And more than once, you've seen couples going to healers to ensure fertility, with techniques that involve dancing naked under the full moon and burying bread with honey in the yard. If a crow lands on the roof, it's a sign of death. If the wind whistles loudly, it's a warning from the spirits. If the candle flickers on its own, someone's soul is nearby. You start to live as if you're in a horror movie, but without a script, without an ending, and with way more fleas. But the great dread, the one that paralyzes even the most devout peasant, is the plague, the Black Death. If a rat appears in the house, you're already on alert. If 2 rats appear, you pray. If the baker starts to cough, well, time to run. Where to? It doesn't matter. Just walk. Because nobody understands the disease. They think it's miasma, a poisonous vapor, or a punishment from God, or witchcraft, or all of the above. You remember the last time the plague came to the village. The church bell rang for 3 hours. People crying, burning clothes, fleeing to the mountains. And you could only think, was it me? Did I eat something bad? Did my impure thought from yesterday morning cause all this? And then you cross yourself forcefully and sleep with garlic on your forehead. There are also the amulets, a wolf's tooth, a lucky stone, a lock of a virgin's hair, collected without consent, of course, and even fingernails from a corpse, all with vague promises, protection, strength, fertility, peace in your dreams. You wear them all at the same time. You look like a walking display of medieval esotericism, but you feel slightly safer. And the omens? The list is endless. Hearing 3 crows? Bad. Seeing a beggar spit upwards? Awful. Dreaming of burnt bread? Misfortune is coming. You try to ignore it. But after your piglet died mysteriously right after you saw a bee flying backward, well, now you pay more attention. And when in doubt, better make a promise. You go to the nearest altar, kneel on the cold floor, and swear you'll stop sinning for a week or 2 days, until the next toothache. You promise fasting, abstinence, prayers, and maybe even to walk on your knees to the nearest cross. The important thing is to show you're trying, because nobody wants to be the next target of the invisible. Even nature gets in on the superstitious equation. A lightning strike? God is angry. An eclipse? The end of times. A hailstorm? Rural witchcraft. You live in a reality where everything has a hidden meaning, and all the meanings involve fear, punishment, or the goat that looked at you funny. Ignorance is widespread, but fear, that is organized, collective, structured. Fear unites. It keeps the people in line, in the church, in superstition. And you realize that living here is constantly trying to guess what's going to go wrong and protect yourself beforehand, even if that means sleeping with salt in your pockets and blessing the bread before you eat it. And there, as you listen to another story about a peasant who turned to stone for not praying before drinking water, you accept it. Superstition is the science of your time, and fear is your daily textbook. And you complain that your horoscope is an exaggeration. You're alive. It's a miracle or a divine oversight. Because after surviving hunger, rats, the plague, random justice, bread that walks on its own, and the collective odor of 17 unwashed bodies, this can only be celestial intervention or stubbornness. You sit on a stone that has no visible fleas, a luxury. The sky is grey, as always. The village is quiet, except for a baby crying, a pig squealing, and a priest shouting louder than both. But you're breathing, with a stuffy nose, but you're breathing. And then you think, what was all that? Living in the Middle Ages wasn't an experience. It was a test, a challenge of physical, emotional, and above all, olfactory endurance. You passed, with a fever, back pain, and mild trauma, but you passed. You learned that time here is slow. The day is long, the night is longer, and the problems are always the same. Cold, hunger, plague, church, more hunger, someone being hanged, and of course, suspicious cheese. Everything revolves in this magical cycle of discomfort. You saw 50 absurdities, but it felt like 500, because nothing here is simple. Even drinking water involves a risk of death. Eating involves doubt. Sleeping involves praying you're not mistaken for a warlock in the middle of the night. And loving is another dangerous sport, especially if your face isn't very symmetrical. You got to know the medieval fears, some real, some invented, but all very well fed with faith, ignorance, and a touch of collective panic. You understood that in this era, logic is not a priority, and survival isn't guaranteed, even with good intentions. You saw that bathing is a crime, knowledge is suspicious, and your neighbor's cough can become a prophecy. You learned that marriage is a social contract with no right to a refund, that a tavern brawl can end with a visit to the dungeon, and that a pig can be tried for murder. You walked through fairs that smelled like old liver, sat on benches that screamed in pain, heard music that detunes the soul, and saw plays with scripts written by someone who was clearly starving. And yet you found a shred of beauty in the chaos. You laughed or tried to, danced crookedly, loved poorly, avoided a priest with breath like a funeral, ran from a goat with a murderous stare, kept lice as pets, and survived the 3-week-old bread that now has a life of its own, and political opinions. And at the end of this journey, you didn't become a hero, or a knight, or a noble, or a monk. You remained you. A smelly, confused peasant with lower back pain and hope in the form of thin soup. But let's admit, that's already more than many people achieved. You learned that the Middle Ages weren't made for you, or for anyone, honestly. It was a long pause in history, a period when the world took a vacation from hygiene, common sense, and, at times, humanity. But it left marks, smells, and lessons. Now, tired listener, you can return to your room, to your pillow, to your modern world, where toilet paper exists, hot water comes out of the wall, and no one is going to judge you for liking fresh cheese. You survived the Middle Ages, even if it was only by listening. And hopefully, sleep has already found you in the midst of this chaos. But if it hasn't, I hope at least the tedium served as an anesthetic, because that's the idea, that the stinkiest story in the world is also the most relaxing. Good night, tired listener, and until next time, sleep with a tired story.